Hi everyone. So, as you might have read so far in the description that I've emailed through, we're going to do today how to draw a dog because that was one of the requests. And as I was saying in the description that I've sent through, there are a lot of different methods out there on the internet about how to draw a dog. For example, there's a few that are like draw a circle and then draw an extra sort of triangle shape underneath it, and then put a midline and then break it up into fourths and all that sort of thing. You can do that to do a dog or a cat or pretty much any other sort of animal face if you want to. But with humans, like our ears generally are the same sort of shape. Our noses, some might be wider, some more pointy, but similar kind of shape. Mouths, again, some variation in lip size, but same kind of shape. But if you look at different breeds of dogs or cats, they're very different in terms of ears, pointiness of nose, fur, all those sorts of things. So for me, if I'm drawing an animal, I find it easier just to look at the individual animal that I'm looking at and draw what I see. Now, the issue with that as a beginner is it can be difficult to maintain the proportions. So when I'm talking about proportions, I mean how big is the eye in relation to the nose, or how big is the ear in relation to the size of the head, those sorts of things. So when you're copying something, you need to make sure that those proportions are the same in your drawing as they are in the picture that you're copying. So one way to do that is to use a grid, which I know several of you have used this before, but for those who haven't, this is just a brief description of how to do that. Now, the subject that I picked is one that I found online. It was in I think it was a high schooler had drawn it for an art project, so I thought this is probably quite a good one to copy. It's a nice drawing. In terms of shading and fur and that sort of thing, it's fairly straightforward. So we can really just focus on the proportions and how to use the grid rather than worrying about all the detail of the fur as well. Right, so how to begin? I've already put a grid over the subject drawing of the dog, and I've attached that to the email. If you want to draw a different type of animal, just get it printed out and then draw a grid over the top of that, and then you can follow exactly the same procedure. But if you want to follow the one I've sent, just grab the one off the email. And then what you need to make sure is that the grid that you draw on your own paper has exactly the same number of squares as the one on the picture that you're copying. So the one I've sent through is 8 squares across by 6 squares down. So the one I've drawn on my page here is the same. I apologize, by the way, that you can't see my entire page. It's because I'm really bad with technology and I've tried to stack my phone up on top of my iPad on its side with a ruler. It's a nightmare. So I apologize that you can't see that, but this will work fine for the majority of the lesson. Right, now, in terms of how big to make each of your squares, that partly depends on the size of your paper, but also you need to think about, do you want to make your drawing the same size as the one that you're copying? Do you want to make it bigger or do you want to make it smaller? I've gone for slightly bigger. So my squares here, they're 1 inch by 1 inch, and I just did that because I put my ruler across the page and that was an easy way to mark it out. Doesn't matter what size you do it, as long as your squares are actually square and you have the same number as the ones on your on your subject drawing. Right, and then you just go square by square and you draw what you see in each square on your subject piece. So you can actually number the squares across if you want to. I use numbers across the top and then letters down the side, D, E, F. Right, so if I'm going across the top row, because what I really want to do to start off with is just mark in the outline of my drawing, and that makes sure that I do have the outline at least in exactly the right place before I start doing detail. So I don't see any outline until I get across to square 2A, and I see a little bit in the corner of the ear, and then I go across to A3 and I draw what I see, and I just keep following that along. When you're doing that, really check as you cross each grid line, how far up the grid line am I crossing? So for example, here I looked at where am I crossing? It's roughly halfway up that grid line. And across to the next bit, there's 2 lines here, it might be difficult for you to see. I look at where both of them are crossing. One is about 3/4 of the way up, or no, maybe 2/3. The next one's about 3/4. And that'll help you to make sure that you're keeping all your proportions in the right place. When it comes to something like the eye here, I'm looking to see how big is that eye compared to the width of that square. And it's probably a little less than half on the subject, so that's what I've done here. And I've noted that it does cross that grid line just a little bit. So that's what you do all over. As I said, first of all, do the outline all around the edge and then start to put in some of the details. Can also be useful to check things like the white space or the gaps between things. So here I've actually made this a little too wide, I think. I'm looking at my picture. Oh no, it's not too bad. I should have made it a little bit wider at the top, that gap, that white gap. So I want to really check the shape of it. In fact, the ear here as well, now that I'm looking at the subject, could have come down a little lower as well. So really checking that white space. Oh yeah, and I could have chopped off a little bit there as well. I mean, you don't have to be too pedantic. Ultimately, as long as it looks like a dog, great. But you know, again, if you were doing a portrait of someone's dog, you would want to make sure that you really do look at those details quite closely. So do all your outlines and then start to mark in some of these extra bits like the inside of the ear. And if you look closely on the subject, you'll see there is a bit of a white gap down here. So I marked that in as well. The eye, the nose, the paws. And then you go and look at where are some of these main wrinkles and skin folds and mark them in quite lightly to start off with. If I'm looking, for example, here up at this square here, actually I don't have my grid on me at the moment, so I'm just going to fly by the seat of my pants a little bit here. So if I'm marking some of those in now, see, I'll do it this lightly. I don't want it to be too obvious at all. It really isn't until you actually get to the shading point that you'll want to mark those in a lot more darkly. Okay, so mark them all in. You can see I've done some down here around the bottom of the nose as well, and I've also marked in areas of shading. So for example, this bit here, I've marked in where there's going to be some shadow, and I've marked in where there's going to be some light. So you can use the grid lines for all of that. Once you've got those main parts marked in, that's when you can erase any of the grid lines that are going to be showing through. I haven't done it on the ear here because I just wanted you to be able to see in the photos that I've sent through where my shading is in relation to the subject. But you can, once you've got the main parts in, you can absolutely erase the grid lines. Right, and then in terms of shading, as I described before, I like to mark in the really dark bits first. So anything I could see on the subject that was very dark, I've used a 4B pencil there to put that in. If you don't have a 4B pencil, just mark it lightly in HB to start with, and then you'll just have to use extra pressure to make that quite dark. And then when you get to shading the wrinkles and anything lighter, just for example, if I was going to do this one, I'm just marking it in quite lightly with my HB pencil, and then use a blending stump to just lightly go over the top of that and soften it very lightly either side. You still want the actual indent of the wrinkle to show through, but you don't want it to have a hard edge. So don't rub it too hard, otherwise you'll just end up with one lot of blurring down the middle there. So I might even just mark in the very center of that again. If you don't have a blending stump, don't worry, you can use a tissue that you fold up to a fine point on a corner, or a Q-tip, or what else could you use? Piece of kitchen roll. If you really get desperate, you can fold up some toilet paper to a fine edge, although given how valuable that is at the moment, maybe not. Don't use your finger, that's the only thing I would say. But just something that will allow you to smudge it a little bit. And then just keep working your way through. There's when you get to the very bottom here, where you're doing the surface of the floor or whatever it is that the dog is lying on, just be really observant of the direction of your pencil strokes, because they're going out to the side, out to the left-hand side on the left. Then as you come around the front of the dog, they're a little more towards you. And then by the time you get to the other paw, they're going out to the right-hand side. So make sure you do that. It will help sort of reinforce the perspective. Okay, I think that's about it. Would love to see what you draw. If you get stuck part way, please just take a photo, get your parents to email it to me, and I'll give you some suggestions. But I hope you enjoy it. And as I said at the beginning, feel free to pick a different picture if you don't want to do this dog, that's fine. And let me know how you go. Okay, have a good day. Bye.